The night Rebecca texted me asking if I'd be her safety call for a weekend trip, I thought I was doing her husband a favor. Turns out I was doing her one instead. My name is David Hale. I'm 42, and I run a small architectural drafting firm out of a converted storefront in Portland that still has the original pressed tin ceiling and windows that rattle when trucks pass. I'd been divorced for 3 years by then, one of those quiet separations where nobody cheated and nobody screamed, just two people who built a life that looked better on paper than it felt in practice. My ex-wife had wanted adventure. I'd wanted consistency. We both got what we asked for in the end. Rebecca and I had been friends since college. She'd married Tom right after graduation, a finance guy who treated marriage like a portfolio he was managing for long-term growth. They seemed fine. Not happy exactly, but fine. The kind of couple who hosted dinner parties with place cards and wines that came with explanations. I'd been to enough of those dinners to recognize the difference between partnership and performance. So when she called me on a Thursday afternoon in late September, her voice carrying that careful brightness people use when they're asking for something they think might be refused, I didn't think much of it. She and 3 girlfriends were driving down to Cannon Beach for the weekend. Girls' trip. Wine, ocean air, the kind of thing married women in their late 30s do when they need to remember what laughing feels like. Tom was traveling for work. She wanted someone back home who'd pick up if things went sideways. Just in case, she said. You know how it is. One of us drinks too much, someone needs a ride, something gets weird. I just want to know there's a person I can call who won't make it into a whole thing. I told her, of course. What else was I going to say? It was Rebecca. We'd pulled all-nighters in the architecture library. She'd been at my wedding. I'd watched her gain and lose the same 15 pounds every January for a decade. You don't say no to someone like that. The weekend started quietly. She texted me Friday night from the rental house. A picture of 4 wine glasses on a weathered deck overlooking the Pacific. String lights glowing overhead. We're alive. So far, so good. Saturday morning, another message. Coffee on the beach, gray sky, her handwriting in the sand that said something about tides and time. I sent back a thumbs up. She sent back a photo of a crab. Then Saturday night, just past 11, my phone lit up. 3 words. Come get me, please. No context. No explanation. Just those 5 syllables that turned my stomach into a fist. I called her immediately. It rang 4 times before she picked up, and when she did, her voice was low and tight, the kind of quiet people use when they're trying not to be overheard. I can't talk right now. Can you just come? I'm at the Tides Inn off Highway 101. Room 14. I'll explain when you get here. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys, pulled on a jacket, and got in the car. Cannon Beach was an hour and 40 minutes from Portland if you drove like a reasonable person. I made it in 73 minutes. The Tides Inn was one of those coastal motels that hadn't been updated since 1987, turquoise doors and a neon sign that buzzed in the salt air. I found room 14 at the far end of the second-floor walkway. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the light on inside. I knocked twice, soft enough not to wake the neighbors, loud enough for her to hear. The door opened 6 inches. Rebecca stood there in jeans and an oversized sweater, barefoot, her hair pulled into a knot that was coming apart on one side. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't crying. She looked like someone who'd made a decision and was still trying to figure out if it was the right one. Hey, she said. Hey, I said back. You okay? She nodded, then stepped aside to let me in. The room was small and clean in that impersonal motel way. 1 queen bed neatly made, a duffel bag on the chair. The TV was off. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something sharper, maybe gin. She sat down on the edge of the bed and rubbed her hands over her face. I stayed standing, leaning against the wall near the door, giving her space to talk or not talk, whichever she needed. I left, she said finally. The trip. I just left. Oh, what happened? She let out a long breath, the kind that sounds like it's been held too long. Nothing happened. That's the problem. We were sitting on the deck tonight, all 4 of us, drinking wine and talking about our lives, and Melissa started crying because her husband forgot their anniversary again. And Jenny said, that's just marriage, you know? You stop being surprised. You stop being seen. And everyone nodded like that was normal. Like that was the deal we all signed up for. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness. Something closer to clarity. And I realized I didn't want to nod, she said. I didn't want to agree that being invisible was just the price of being married. So I told them I needed air, and I walked down to the beach, and I just kept walking. I ended up here. I checked in, and then I texted you because you were the only person I could think of who wouldn't tell me I was being dramatic. I didn't say anything right away. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them hear their own words settle. Does Tom know you're here? I asked. No. He thinks I'm at the beach house with the girls. They think I went back to Portland early because I wasn't feeling well. Nobody knows except you. What do you want me to do? She stood up and crossed to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the parking lot below, the wet pavement reflecting the neon sign. I don't know yet. I just needed to not be there. And I needed someone to know where I was. Someone who wouldn't try to fix it before I figured out what it even was. I understood that. I'd been the person trying to fix things that didn't want to be fixed. It never worked. We sat in that room for the better part of an hour, talking in the quiet, unrushed way you can only talk with someone who's known you long enough to recognize when silence is part of the conversation. She told me about the last 2 years, how Tom had stopped asking her questions, how she'd started feeling like a well-organized accessory in someone else's life, how she'd wake up at 3 a.m. and realize she couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at her like she surprised him. I told her about the year after my divorce, when I'd thought being alone meant being broken, and how long it took me to realize that being alone just meant I had room to figure out what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I was supposed to want. Around midnight, she asked if I was hungry. I was. We walked down to a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, one of those places with red vinyl booths and laminated menus that offer breakfast all day. We sat in the back corner, ordered coffee and pie, and kept talking. She asked me why I never remarried. I told her I almost did about a year ago, but I realized I was trying to rebuild the same house with different materials. She laughed at that. A real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. "You're smarter than I am," she said. "No," I said. "I just had a head start on making the same mistakes." She looked at me across the table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and something shifted in the air between us. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just a small recalibration, like a door that had been stuck finally swinging open. "I'm glad I called you," she said. "I'm glad you did too." We stayed there until almost 2 a.m, until the waitress started wiping down tables with the kind of deliberate slowness that suggests you've overstayed your welcome. I paid the check, and we walked back to the motel under a sky that was too overcast to show stars. The wind off the ocean was cold and smelled like salt and wet sand. When we got back to her room, she hesitated at the door. "You don't have to drive back tonight. It's late. You can stay. I'll take the bed, you can take the chair, or we can both be adults about it and just sleep." And I looked at her. She looked back. There was no agenda in her eyes, just exhaustion and honesty. "Okay," I said. We ended up lying on opposite sides of the bed, fully clothed, the covers pulled up, both of us staring at the ceiling like teenagers at a sleepover. She turned her head toward me. "Can I ask you something?" She said. "After tonight, I feel like I should be nervous." She smiled. "You probably should. Are you always this careful?" Depends what I'm trying not to break." And she didn't answer right away. When she looked back, her expression had changed, softened somehow. "Well, for the record, I'm not made of glass."
I didn't say anything.
I didn't need to. We both knew what was happening, and we both knew it wasn't something you rushed. She fell asleep first, her breathing evening out into the slow rhythm of someone who'd finally stopped running calculations in her head. I stayed awake a while longer, watching the faint light from the parking lot stripe the ceiling, thinking about all the years we'd been friends, and how strange it was that it took her leaving a beach house full of women who loved her to end up in a motel room with me. The next morning we woke up to pale gray light filtering through the curtains and the distant sound of gulls. She rolled over and looked at me, her hair a mess, her eyes still sleepy. "Morning," she said. "Morning. I should probably call Tom." "Yeah, probably." She sat up, pulled her phone from the nightstand, and stared at it for a long moment. Then she set it back down. "Actually, I should probably figure out what I'm going to say first." We got coffee from the motel lobby, terrible coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime in the previous century, and sat outside on the walkway, watching the ocean in the distance. She asked me what I thought she should do. I told her I couldn't answer that. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer, and was relieved to get it. "I think I need to go home," she said finally. "But not to the same home I left. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," I said. "It does." And she called Tom that afternoon, standing in the parking lot with her arms crossed against the wind. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could see her body language, the way she stood straighter as the conversation went on. When she came back, she looked tired but steady. "He's upset," she said. "He wants to know where I am, what happened, why I didn't tell him. I told him I needed space to think, and that when I got home we needed to talk. Really talk. Not the kind of talking we've been doing for the last 5 years." How'd he take it? Like someone who just realized he might actually lose something he'd stopped paying attention to. I drove her back to Portland that evening. We didn't talk much on the way, just let the road and the radio fill the space. When I pulled up in front of her house, the lights were on inside. Tom's car was in the driveway. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face me. "Thank you for coming, for listening, for not trying to tell me what to do. That's what friends are for." She smiled, a small, complicated smile that carried about a dozen things she wasn't saying out loud. Then she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "I'll call you," she said. "I'll answer." She got out of the car, grabbed her bag from the back seat, and walked up the driveway. I watched until she went inside, then drove home through the dark, 3 weeks later, she called me. She and Tom were separating. Not a dramatic blow-up, just an honest conversation that led to an honest conclusion. She was moving into her own place, a small apartment near the river with big windows and a landlord who allowed dogs. She was thinking about getting a dog, something medium-sized and scruffy. 6 months after that, she showed up at my office on a Friday afternoon with takeout Thai food and a bottle of wine. We ate on the floor of the drafting studio, surrounded by blueprints and models, talking about her new job and my new project and the ways people rebuild their lives when they finally stop apologizing for wanting something different. Somewhere between the spring rolls and the second glass of wine, she asked me if I'd ever thought about us, not as friends, as something else. I told her I'd thought about it exactly once, the night I picked her up from that motel, and then I'd thought about it every day since. She set down her glass, leaned forward, and kissed me. Not on the cheek this time. A real kiss. The kind that rewrites the entire history of every conversation you've ever had. A year later, I proposed to her in the same motel room where she'd called me that night. I'd rented it for the weekend, cleaned it up, brought flowers and candles and a ring I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket for 2 months. When I got down on one knee on that terrible carpet, she started laughing and crying at the same time. "You're insane," she said. "I know." Yes. The answer is yes. We got married 6 months later in the backyard of the house we bought together, a small ceremony with 30 people and a golden retriever named Hank, who barked twice during the vows. She wore a simple dress. I wore a suit. We promised each other we'd keep asking questions. That was 4 years ago. We still do. So here's what I want to know. What would you have done if your closest friend texted you in the middle of the night asking for help? And have you ever realized that the person you needed was right there all along? You just had to stop pretending you didn't see them? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.